London, the spring of 1891. The bells of St. Helena's Cathedral rang bright and cruel beneath the grey morning sky, echoing through the streets where carriages lined the square like silent witnesses. Inside, hundreds of eyes shimmered in candlelight, waiting to see a legend unfold, one of wealth, power, and the promise of a perfect union. If you believe love can survive humiliation, leave your thought in the comments below. Now listen closely, for this story begins not with vows, but with betrayal. Amelia Harwood stood at the altar beneath a crown of white roses that trembled with her heartbeat. The veil over her face blurred the golden light, turning the world into a haze of expectation. Across from her, Lord Sebastian Wickliffe, the future Duke of Ashbourne, lifted his gaze from the prayer book. His expression held no joy, no pride, only disbelief. "This is not my bride," he said. The whisper rolled through the cathedral like thunder contained within stone. Guests froze. Fans stilled. Even the organ faltered mid-note. Amelia's knees weakened, yet she did not faint. Behind her, the scent of lilacs from the pews carried the faintest trace of home and ironic comfort. She had known this day would bring humiliation. She had simply not imagined it would come so soon. Lady Harwood's sharp voice rose from the front row. "Sebastian, the vows have been prepared. Continue." But the Duke's jaw tightened. Prepared for Clara, not her. He looked at the veiled figure before him, as if she were a ghost summoned by deceit. The guests murmured. The word impostor passed from one corseted whisper to another. A few men turned away in discomfort. The women leaned forward, hungry for scandal. Amelia lowered her head. Beneath the veil, her lips moved soundlessly. She could have spoken, could have explained, yet silence was the only armor left to her. The priest's voice trembled. "My lord, the ceremony—" "There is no ceremony," Sebastian interrupted. "Not with her." Lady Harwood rose, her emerald silk rustling like storm water. "For the sake of honor, you will marry her now. My family's name cannot endure this scene." "Honor?" Sebastian's laugh was low, bitter. "You speak of honor, yet you bring me a stranger in your daughter's place." The crowd gasped. Amelia felt the world tilt. For a moment she saw only the glimmer of the chandelier above, the wax of melting candles falling like slow tears. Her hands trembled around the small bouquet of gardenias, the same flowers her sister had chosen. Then the priest, pale and fearful, hurried through the remaining words. The Duke's voice turned to ice when he uttered, "I do." She whispered her answer. The words left her lips barely audible, a pledge without hope. When the organ thundered again, it sounded like judgment. Outside, rain began to fall, a fine drizzle that blurred the carriages waiting beyond the cathedral gates. Guests rushed for their umbrellas, speaking in sharp whispers. Amelia stepped into the cold air, her new husband walking ahead without offering his arm. The driver opened the carriage door. She climbed in silently. Through the fogged window she saw her mother's face, satisfied, cruelly calm. For Lady Harwood the scandal had been avoided. The marriage, however hollow, was done. Sebastian sat opposite her, gloved hands folded over his knee. "Do you know what your mother has done?" "Yes," Amelia answered softly. "She has saved your title and our name, and in doing so destroyed mine." He looked away, jaw set. "This union will exist only in paper. You will remain in the country. I will return to London alone." Amelia turned her gaze to the window. The city blurred into streaks of grey, carriages dissolving in rain. Somewhere a child laughed in the distance. The sound broke her heart more than his words. At Harwood Manor that evening, servants lit the hearths and avoided her eyes. Her mother welcomed them with forced warmth, ordering supper as though the day had been nothing more than a social inconvenience. When Sebastian left for London the next morning, he did not look back. Amelia stood at the top of the stone steps, the veil gone, her hair loose in the wind. The rain had washed away the perfume from her flowers. What remained was only the faint scent of smoke from the chimneys and the cold promise of solitude. She walked back inside, past portraits of ancestors who would never acknowledge her. In the quiet corridor she touched the wall where sunlight painted thin gold lines across the wallpaper. "If this is honor," she whispered, "then I have none left to lose." Downstairs, Lady Harwood's voice echoed, giving instructions for the announcement to the press. "The marriage of Lord Ashbourne and Miss Amelia Harwood, a union of grace and tradition." Amelia smiled bitterly at the irony. That night she sat by the window, ink and paper before her. The first letter she wrote began with his name, then stopped midway. She folded the blank sheet and placed it in a small wooden box. Outside, the rain turned heavier, as if London itself mourned what had been lost. In that darkness, one truth settled within her. If society demanded silence, she would make silence her weapon. 3 days before the wedding, The Harwood estate lay under the pale glow of early spring. The servants hurried across the marble floors, polishing silver, arranging roses, preparing for the ceremony that would bind the Harwood fortune to one of England's oldest titles. To any observer, the household appeared content. Yet behind the closed doors of the morning room, voices trembled with desperation. Lady Harwood stood by the fireplace, one hand gripping the mantelpiece, her knuckles white. "Clara is gone," she said, her voice thin and sharp, "vanished into the night like a foolish girl in a novel. The Duke's carriage will arrive within days. We cannot let London laugh at us." Amelia stood opposite her mother, still wearing the plain gown she used for household duties. The scent of lavender from the freshly pressed linens clung to her sleeves. "You mean Clara ran away?" she said quietly. "She never wanted this marriage." Lady Harwood turned, eyes flashing. "She never had the courage for it. You will take her place. The veil will hide your face until the vows are done. Once the signatures are made, there will be no undoing." Amelia stepped back, disbelief choking her voice. "Mother, he has promised to her, to deceive him, to save us." Lady Harwood cut in. "The Duke's family expects a union with Harwood blood. You share that blood. Do you think society will care whether you were born on the right side of the bed? You carry the same eyes, the same name. You owe this family your obedience." "I owe this family nothing," Amelia whispered. "I was hidden from it my entire life." For a heartbeat, the silence between them deepened, heavy with years of unspoken truths. Amelia had been raised, not in the grand house, but in a cottage on the edge of the estate, educated quietly by a governess, introduced to no one. Only when her father's health declined had Lady Harwood summoned her back, calling her a companion for Clara. Yet even then, Amelia had known the truth. She was the reminder of an affair that had almost destroyed a noble marriage. Lady Harwood's expression softened, but her words remained cruelly practical. "Think, child. Without this, you have no dowry, no future. The Duke's household will provide comfort, perhaps even respect. It is a small deceit for a lifetime of stability." Amelia turned toward the window, watching rain begin to gather on the glass. Beyond the gardens lay the path that led to the small lake, where she used to walk with Clara during their rare moments of peace. Clara had always been the sun, brilliant and demanding. Amelia, the quiet reflection in the water. Now the reflection was asked to become the sun itself. "I cannot live as another woman," Amelia said at last. "You will live as my daughter," her mother answered. "That should be enough." When she left the room, Amelia's steps felt unreal, as though she were moving inside someone else's dream. In the corridor, she met Martha, the maid who had raised her since childhood. Martha's lined face paled when she saw the look in Amelia's eyes. "She told you, didn't she?" Martha asked in a whisper. Amelia nodded. "She told me everything except how to become someone I am not." Martha reached for her hand. "Then be yourself beneath the veil, and let him see you in time. Truth has a way of shining through silk." That night Amelia could not sleep. She walked to the library where the moonlight fell across the spines of her father's books. Among them lay volumes of poetry, Wordsworth, Byron, Keats, names that once comforted her when she was hidden away. She opened one at random and read softly, "Though nothing can bring back the hour of splendor in the grass, of glory in the flower." Her voice broke. Perhaps deceit was the price of survival in a world built on appearances. When dawn arrived, she found her mother in the parlor dictating letters to the family solicitor. "The announcement will proceed as planned," Lady Harwood said briskly. "The guests will assume Clara has taken ill and cannot greet them until the ceremony. You will wear her gown. Do not falter, Amelia. If you hesitate even once, everything will be lost." Amelia stared at the lace laid out upon the chaise, the ivory silk, the pearls, the fragrance of orange blossoms. She thought of the girl for whom it had been sewn, carefree and spoiled, who now rode toward the coast with a minor nobleman rumored to love adventure more than honor. "I am not afraid," Amelia said softly, surprising herself. "But I will not lie for vanity, only for survival." "Then we understand each other," Lady Harwood replied. Later that afternoon, as the seamstress adjusted the gown's delicate buttons, Amelia caught her own reflection in the mirror. For the first time she noticed how closely she resembled Clara enough to deceive the careless gaze of a man who had met his betrothed only a handful of times. Yet beneath that resemblance there was something entirely different, the calm resolve of a woman who knew she was being turned into a sacrifice. She remembered the single evening she had spoken with Lord Sebastian 2 years earlier. It had been at the midsummer dinner when she still lived as a servant's companion, and he had wandered into the gardens seeking quiet from the noise of the ballroom. He had found her sketching a rose and asked if she believed flowers knew they were beautiful. She had answered, "Perhaps they do, but they never ask for witness." He had smiled then, a fleeting moment of genuine warmth that had stayed with her long after he left. She wondered if he remembered. Now, as the wedding approached, that memory returned like a fragile spark of hope. Perhaps he would look beyond the veil. Perhaps he would see her for who she truly was, not for the deception forced upon them both. Outside, the estate bell rang to mark the hour. Servants hurried through the corridors carrying ribbons, candles, and silver trays. The world moved toward ceremony, unstoppable as time itself. Amelia stood alone before the mirror, her hand resting on the pearl necklace that had belonged to her grandmother. It was the only thing that had ever been truly hers. She whispered to her reflection, 3 days from now the truth will be sealed in ink, and I will belong to a man who does not know my name. In that moment, she felt both the weight and the power of her choice. Though she was entering the charade under command, she would endure it on her own terms, with silence, with grace, and with a heart that refused to die quietly. As the light dimmed across the gardens, she watched a carriage arrive in the distance, the Wycliffe crest glinting in the twilight. The Duke had come early, and with his arrival, the first thread of deceit began to tighten around her life. The carriage bearing the Wycliffe crest came to a slow halt before the manor gates. The horses stamped impatiently, their breath misting in the evening air. From the upstairs window, Amelia watched as servants rushed forward to assist the guests. The man who stepped out wore the dark blue coat of the Ashbourne lineage, his posture measured, his movements precise. Sebastian Wycliffe, the future Duke, was every inch the legend London adored, handsome, composed, untouchable. Her mother's voice drifted up the staircase. Stay out of sight until the ceremony. No one must suspect. But Amelia did not move away from the window. She watched as Sebastian greeted her father with a formal bow, his expression courteous but cool. It was strange, she thought, that a man could look so noble and yet seem entirely alone. That night, unable to rest, Amelia wandered through the gardens where moonlight brushed the fountains with silver. The air smelled faintly of jasmine, the same fragrance that had filled the summer evening 2 years earlier when she had first spoken to him. She had been 19 then, living quietly in the small cottage near the lake. The Harwoods had hosted a midsummer ball, and the sounds of laughter and waltz music had carried across the estate. She had stood outside, sketching the reflection of the lanterns in the water, when a man's voice broke the stillness behind her. Do you always hide from celebrations? She had turned to see him, tall, his hair touched by moonlight, his manner confident but not unkind. I am not invited, she had answered. Then the ball has lost its best company, he said lightly. I needed an escape myself. He had looked out across the lake where the fireflies shimmered. I wonder, he said, if beauty is ever aware of itself. These lights, they burn so briefly, yet we remember them long after they fade. Amelia had smiled, closing her sketchbook. Perhaps that is why they burn at all, to be remembered. He had laughed quietly. Then you too will be remembered, miss? Amelia, she had said after a pause, withholding her family name. It was easier that way, to be no one for a moment. He had taken a step closer, curious. You speak like a poet. Only like someone who listens, she replied. A silence had settled between them, not awkward, but filled with the kind of understanding that needs no explanation. The distant music floated across the water, and when he turned to leave, he had said, perhaps next season we will meet in brighter company. She had watched him disappear into the night, unaware that the next time she would stand before him, it would be as his bride in name only. Now, 2 years later, standing in the same garden, Amelia remembered that encounter with painful clarity. He had seen her once as herself, not as the daughter of Lady Harwood, not as a secret hidden from society. For one brief moment, they had spoken as equals, but that memory felt like a cruel jest of fate. She turned toward the manor. Through the window, she could see the faint glow of lamps in the guest chambers. He was there now, unaware that the woman who had spoken to him by the lake was the same who would soon wear his bride's veil. The next morning, preparations for the wedding began in earnest. Servants moved through the halls like a well-rehearsed orchestra. Lady Harwood inspected every detail, her voice slicing through the air like a conductor's baton. Amelia dressed quietly in a simple gown, her mind replaying the memory of that midsummer night over and over, searching for meaning in every word he had spoken. When she entered the breakfast room, her father was there, reading correspondence from London. His voice, usually distant, softened slightly when he noticed her hesitation. You have always had your mother's courage, he said, though his eyes did not meet hers. This family's future rests upon you now. She wanted to ask him if he understood the cost of that future, but the question died in her throat. Later that afternoon, she found herself walking once again through the gardens, drawn to the scent of lavender and the quiet rustle of leaves. It was there that she saw him, Sebastian, standing beneath the same willow tree where they had once spoken. He did not see her at first. He was studying the lake, his posture tense. When he turned, their eyes met. For a fleeting moment, recognition flickered in his gaze, as if a shadow of memory brushed his mind. "You," he said softly, "have we met before?" Amelia felt her pulse quicken. "Perhaps," she said, forcing a calm she did not feel. "It was long ago." He studied her face. "You remind me of someone I once met here. A young woman who spoke as if she could see right through the world's pretenses." "She sounds rather bold," Amelia said, smiling faintly. "She was," he admitted, "and I have thought of her more than once." The admission startled her. For 2 years she had carried that night like a secret flame. To know he remembered was almost unbearable. "I hope she has found happiness," Amelia said. "I hope so too," he murmured. Before she could respond, Lady Harwood's voice called from across the terrace. "Lord Wycliffe, dinner awaits." He inclined his head politely and turned away. The moment broke like glass. As Amelia watched him walk toward the manor, she realized the cruel symmetry of fate, that the man who remembered her voice would never know he had already found her again. That evening, as twilight deepened and the servants lit the chandeliers, she lingered by the window, staring at the faint reflection of herself in the glass. The face that looked back was calm, composed, ready for the masquerade her mother demanded. But deep within, the girl from the garden, the one who had spoken of fireflies and remembrance, whispered a vow to survive whatever came next. Morning broke over Harwood Manor, wrapped in mist, soft and silver like the calm before a storm. The scent of roses drifted through the corridors, and the echo of hurried footsteps carried an unease that no servant dared name. Amelia rose before dawn, the room still dim except for a single candle flickering near the mirror. On the table lay the wedding gown, ivory silk, intricate lace, and a veil long enough to hide a lifetime of secrets. Martha entered quietly, carrying a basin of warm water. She avoided Amelia's gaze at first, then whispered, "It will soon be over, my dear. Just stand still, speak little, and the world will believe what it must." Amelia smiled faintly. "It will not be over, Martha. It will only begin." When the last button was fastened, she hardly recognized herself. The reflection in the glass was not the quiet daughter of a secret affair, but a vision sculpted by her mother's ambition. The jewels around her neck caught the candlelight like chains of fire. Outside, carriages gathered one after another, wheels crunching on gravel. London's finest guests arrived in silk and perfume, their laughter masking curiosity. They came to witness a union between Harwood and Ashbourne, a union they assumed flawless. Amelia felt each sound press against her chest like the ticking of a clock. Lady Harwood swept into the room in emerald satin. Her eyes flicked over Amelia with satisfaction mixed with fear. "Remember," she said, "keep your veil lowered until the priest declares the vows complete. Do not tremble. Do not speak unless required. Every second you endure brings safety to us all." Amelia answered quietly. "And what of truth, mother?" "Truth," Lady Harwood said, "is for those who can afford it." The words hung heavy as the door closed. In the carriage to Street Helena's, the world blurred past a haze of green fields, stone cottages, and the distant tolling of bells. Amelia held her bouquet tightly, the stems pressing marks into her gloves. Across from her sat her mother and father, neither daring to speak. For all their wealth, they looked like prisoners riding toward judgment. When they reached the cathedral, the air smelled of rain and candle wax. The great doors opened to reveal the crowd already assembled. Music rose, a triumphant march that seemed to mock her heartbeat. She stepped forward, the veil soft against her lips, her vision reduced to light and motion. Every eye followed her down the aisle. Sebastian waited at the altar, tall and still as carved stone. He turned as she approached, his expression composed, yet there was a flicker of confusion in his gaze. Perhaps the voice of instinct whispered that something was wrong, but he said nothing. The priest began the ceremony. Each phrase echoed through the vaulted ceiling. Amelia felt detached from her body, as though watching herself from afar. When the priest asked if she would take this man, her answer came like the faintest thread of air. "I will." Then came his turn. Sebastian's jaw tightened. "I will," he said, and the words sounded more like a sentence than a promise. Applause followed. Lady Harwood exhaled, the sound of victory disguised as relief. The choir resumed its hymn, drowning out the silence that fell between bride and groom. Outside, a drizzle began to fall. Amelia and Sebastian stood side by side for the portrait that would appear in every London paper. He did not touch her, their shoulders barely brushed. The painter murmured instructions, the crowd murmured gossip, and Amelia kept her eyes forward, a statue carved of restraint. On the steps of the cathedral, the carriage awaited. He offered no hand to help her inside. The doors closed, sealing them in a space thick with unspoken words. After several minutes, he broke the silence. "Do you understand what has been done here?" "I do," she said. "You have married a stranger." "I have married a lie," he corrected. His voice was cold, but beneath it lay confusion, even injury. "Why would your family think this deceit could remain hidden?" "Because deception is an old friend of theirs," she said softly. "They trust it more than love." He looked away, his gloved fingers tightening around the edge of the seat. "I will not live in pretense. When we arrive at Ashbourne House, you will have your own quarters. We will appear together when necessary, but our lives will remain separate." Amelia turned to the window where raindrops trailed down like threads of glass. "Very well, my lord. I ask for nothing else." The carriage rolled through London's cobbled streets, past shops and gaslights reflected in puddles. People paused to glimpse the newlyweds, unaware of the cold silence within. By evening they reached Ashbourne House, a mansion of dark brick and iron balconies. Servants lined the entrance, bowing as the couple ascended the steps. Inside, the corridors smelled of wood polish and formality. Sebastian guided her to the grand hall, gesturing toward the staircase. "Your rooms will be prepared upstairs," he said. "If you require anything, speak to Mrs. Hollis, not to me." Amelia inclined her head. "As you wish." For a moment he hesitated, as though wanting to say something else, but pride silenced him. He turned away, his footsteps fading down the corridor. Alone at last, Amelia removed her gloves and placed her bouquet on the mantel. Petals loosened and fell one by one, scattering across the marble. The scent of roses filled the air, sweet, suffocating, and fragile. She looked out at the city lights flickering through the rain. Somewhere within that brightness, people celebrated her triumph. Only she knew it was a funeral for truth. She whispered to herself, "So this is marriage in the language of society, a promise kept by silence." Then she drew the curtains and let the world vanish into darkness. The morning after their arrival at Ashbourne House dawned grey and heavy with fog. Amelia rose early, the city still quiet beyond the tall windows. The air inside the grand mansion felt too still, too polished, like a museum built to honor everything she did not belong to. Servants moved through the halls with practiced silence, and though they bowed respectfully, their eyes carried curiosity. Word had already spread among them. The new Duchess was not the woman they expected. At breakfast, Sebastian did not appear. A note awaited her instead, written in an elegant, detached hand. "Attend the charity luncheon at Lady Morland's tomorrow. It will please society to see you in public." No signature, no warmth, only instruction. Amelia folded the note carefully and set it aside. She had been told to appear, to play her part, and she would do so on her own terms. That afternoon, she explored the library, a vast room lined with dark oak shelves and centuries of knowledge sealed behind glass. It smelled faintly of ink and dust, a comfort she had not known since her days of solitude at the cottage. She ran her fingers along the spines of books, histories, travel journals, poetry. Among them, she found a collection of essays on philosophy, its cover faded from use. When she opened it, she noticed a name written on the first page, S. Wycliffe. For a long moment, she stared at the signature. Even in something as small as handwriting, his presence felt distant, disciplined. And yet, between the lines, there was longing, the same longing she had glimpsed years ago beneath the willow tree. The next day, the fog lifted, and London glimmered under a pale sun. The Harwood carriage, now bearing the crest of Ashbourne, rolled through the narrow streets toward Lady Morland's townhouse. Crowds gathered, curious to see the new Duchess. As she stepped out, she heard whispers. "She's not as pretty as her sister. No dowry, I heard. A country girl, barely fit for court." Amelia held her chin high, her composure perfect. If they wanted a performance, she would give them a flawless one. Inside, chandeliers cast soft gold across the drawing room. The women of London society, dressed in pastel silks and ambition, turned to greet her with smiles that never reached their eyes. Lady Morland, round and effusive, extended her hand. "My dear Duchess, what a delight. We were beginning to think your husband meant to hide you." Amelia smiled. "Some treasures must be hidden for a time, Lady Morland, to preserve their worth." Laughter rippled through the room, polite but uneasy. She had deflected the barb with grace. It would not be the last. During the luncheon, conversations drifted around her like smoke politics, gossip, scandal. She spoke little, observing how easily people mistook cruelty for wit. When a young woman remarked, "It is said your sister resembles you," but with more charm. Amelia replied evenly, "Then you must find her delightful, since you have known her better than I." The comment silenced the table. Lady Morland's fan snapped open, hiding a smirk. Amelia continued eating as if nothing had happened. By the end of the afternoon, even those who had arrived eager to mock her whispered admiration instead. "She is composed," someone said, almost frighteningly so. When Amelia returned home, the butler informed her that Lord Wycliffe had gone riding in Hyde Park and would not dine with her. She thanked him and ascended the stairs to her chamber. Removing her gloves, she gazed at her reflection in the mirror, no longer the timid girl from the countryside, but a woman quietly claiming her place in a world that had denied her one. Yet in the solitude of her room, the weight of the masquerade pressed down. She walked to the balcony, the city lights glittering below. Laughter rose faintly from carriages passing along the boulevard. Somewhere, he was among them, her husband, her stranger. Later that week, newspapers began to print sketches of the wedding. The headlines read, "A perfect union. The Duke of Ashbourne marries the lovely Miss Harwood." Beneath the headline, gossip columns speculated about her origins. Some claimed she was a distant cousin, others that she had been educated abroad. None guessed the truth, though their lies grew like ivy, curling around her every step. At a charity auction 2 nights later, Sebastian appeared beside her for the first time since the ceremony. He wore black, his manner formal, his tone courteous but cold. When a reporter asked them to pose, he placed a gloved hand at her waist lightly, as one might touch porcelain. She smiled for the camera, whispering without turning her head, "Do you always treat your guests with such warmth, my lord?" His jaw tensed. "Guests do not wear my ring, nor do wives receive your conversation," she replied. He said nothing more, but when the flash went off, capturing their stillness in white light, it looked for all the world like devotion. That night, as they returned home, he broke the silence. "You've managed well. Society seems charmed by your restraint." "I've learned that silence can be louder than gossip," she said. "It unsettles them." He looked at her, truly looked, for the first time since the wedding. "You surprise me." "Then perhaps you have not been listening closely enough," she said. He turned away, but the faintest trace of a smile touched his lips, a ghost of something human, perhaps even admiration. When she retired to her chamber, she opened her small wooden box, the one that held the letters she never sent. She took out a blank page and wrote only one line. "If dignity is the only armor I have left, I will wear it until it shines." Then she folded it, unaddressed, and placed it with the rest. Outside, the city murmured through the fog, alive, merciless, and full of stories. Somewhere within it, hers was just beginning to be written. The following week arrived, with unexpected brightness. London, usually shrouded in fog, gleamed beneath a pale sun. From the balcony of her chamber, Amelia could see the carriages gliding along the avenue, the world already moving on from last week's gossip. Yet inside Ashbourne House, the silence between her and Sebastian remained as sharp as the edge of a blade. They dined together rarely. When they did, conversation hovered around courtesy, never truth. He asked about her engagements. She answered with polite precision. To any servant who observed them, they looked like the perfect noble pair. But between their words lay an unspoken question neither dared voice. "Who are you truly?" One morning, Mrs. Hollis informed Amelia of a letter that had arrived from Lady Morland's committee. They were hosting a charity event for the city's orphanage, seeking donations from prominent families. Amelia read the invitation twice, her heart stirring. "Tell the messenger I will attend," she said. When the day came, she chose a modest gown of pale blue, unadorned except for a simple brooch. Martha fussed over her hair, muttering, "They'll never forget this day, my dear, though not for the reasons they expect." At the orphanage, the air smelled faintly of chalk and lavender soap. Children's laughter echoed through the courtyard, wild and unfiltered. The contrast to London's drawing rooms was startling. No gossip, no masks, only life. Amelia knelt beside a young girl trying to patch a torn sleeve. "May I?" she asked softly, taking the cloth and needle. The child nodded shyly. As she sewed, she spoke to the matron, learning about the shortage of books and winter clothing. Without hesitation, she promised, "You will have what you need before the month's end." The matron's eyes widened. Few nobles gave more than words. By chance, she did not see the black carriage stopping at the gate behind her. Sebastian stepped out, dressed not for society but in plain riding clothes. He had returned early from a morning meeting and been told by a servant that his wife was in the poorer district of the city. Curiosity, or perhaps something unnamed, had led him there. Through the half-open door, he saw her sitting among the children, her gown dusted with chalk, her hands steady as she mended torn sleeves. He stood motionless, hidden by shadow, watching as she smiled gently at a boy who offered her a crude drawing of a house. "Is this yours?" she asked the child. The boy nodded proudly. "It's where I'll live when I grow up." She smiled. "Then make sure it has windows wide enough for sunlight, so no shadow can stay too long." Sebastian's throat tightened. The woman before him was not the ambitious deceiver his pride had imagined. Her voice carried neither pretense nor vanity, it carried warmth. He turned to leave before she could see him, but she noticed movement at the door. "My lord," she said quietly, standing. For a moment he hesitated, caught like a man exposed beneath light. "I was told you came here," he said. "I wish to see for myself." "And what did you expect to find?" He looked around the room, the bare walls, the laughter, the smell of bread baking in the kitchen. "Not this." Her smile was faint. "The city hides its truest places where titles rarely go." He walked closer, his gaze shifting from her face to the children gathering at her skirts. "You should not come here alone." "Should," she repeated, meeting his eyes. "If I live by what society says I should do, I will never live at all." A silence grew between them, but it was no longer cold. He noticed a smudge of dust on her cheek and, without thinking, reached to brush it away. She froze, startled by the unfamiliar gentleness of his touch. He withdrew his hand quickly, as if ashamed of his own impulse. The matron approached to thank them both for their visit, and the moment broke. They spoke no more until they returned to the carriage. As they rode through the narrow streets, the noise of the city surrounded them, vendors calling, wheels clattering over cobblestones. She sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. He glanced at her once, then again. Finally he said, "You have done more good today than most noble women do in a lifetime." "I did what was needed," she replied simply. He hesitated. "You have courage." She turned to him. "No, only necessity. Courage is what men call survival when women do it." He looked away, but his jaw softened. The words unsettled him, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. That night, when Amelia retired, she found a small envelope on her writing desk. Inside was a short note, written in his unmistakable hand. "For the orphanage. You were right, the world needs more sunlight." Beneath the note was a bank draft for a sum far larger than she had requested. She stared at it for a long time, unsure whether to feel gratitude or sorrow. He had begun to see her, perhaps, but only through the lens of guilt. Downstairs, Sebastian stood by the library window, watching the rain return. In the reflection of the glass, he saw not his own image, but hers, quiet, composed, resilient. And for the first time since their marriage, he wondered if the lie he despised had been his own, the lie that he was incapable of feeling anything again. Rain swept through London 2 nights later, turning the city streets into mirrors of trembling light. Inside Ashbourne House, the air felt heavier than usual. Amelia sat by the fire, reading quietly, when a servant entered with a telegram. She unfolded it and read the single sentence that turned her blood to ice. "Lady Clara Harwood has returned from France." For a long moment she stared at the words. Her sister's name felt like a ghost she had never buried. The flame beside her wavered, its light bending as if in sympathy. Clara's absence had begun this entire masquerade. Her return could end it just as swiftly. The following morning, Lady Harwood arrived unannounced. Her expression was a careful mask of control, but her eyes betrayed unease. "Clara wishes to see you," she said. "She insists upon it." Amelia closed her book slowly. "Does she come in peace or for battle?" Lady Harwood's lips tightened. "She claims she seeks understanding. I advise you to grant it before she seeks revenge." When Clara entered that afternoon, she brought with her the perfume of foreign summers and the chill of something sharper. Her beauty was untouched by regret, blonde hair gleaming, smile practiced, eyes bright with calculation. She crossed the threshold of Ashbourne House like someone reclaiming stolen property. "So," Clara said softly, "my timid little sister wears a duchess's crown. I must confess you wear it well. But tell me, do you sleep easily knowing whose place you took?" Amelia rose to meet her, calm but unyielding. "You surrendered that place yourself." Clara's laugh was delicate and cruel. "I surrendered nothing. I only refused a cage. And you, dearest, stepped inside it willingly." Amelia looked at her sister's face, the same fine features, the same shape of mouth, but behind Clara's beauty there was something hollow. "You would have endured one day in that cage before destroying everyone inside it," she said quietly. "Perhaps it was better I took your place." "Oh, noble words," Clara sneered. "But do you imagine London will forgive a marriage built on lies? Shall we test their generosity?" "You wouldn't," Amelia said. Clara moved closer, her voice a whisper of silk and poison. "Wouldn't I? The truth is quite entertaining. The Duke married a woman of uncertain birth, a child his mother hid like a sin. Imagine the scandal, the headlines, the laughter. I could destroy you with a single conversation." Amelia's pulse quickened, yet her tone remained steady. "Then what stops you?" Clara smiled. "I want something first. Lord Wycliffe's attention, his respect, perhaps even his pity. You see, I've realized he was never mine to begin with, but that makes the game far more interesting." For a heartbeat, silence burned between them. Then Amelia said, "If you crave pity, sister, you'll find none here. And if you crave love, do not mistake its shadow for the real thing." Clara's expression flickered. For a moment, something like pain crossed her features, but pride smothered it. "We'll see," she said, turning toward the door. "The truth has a way of shining through your pretty veil of virtue." When she was gone, Amelia stood very still. The faint smell of Clara's perfume lingered like smoke after a candle's death. She felt the ground shift beneath her fate, preparing another test. That evening, Sebastian returned from his meetings to find her waiting in the library. Her posture was calm, but her hands trembled slightly on the back of the chair. "Clara has come back," she said. He paused, removing his gloves. "So I've heard. Lady Harwood informed me this afternoon. She intends to call upon us tomorrow. I thought you should hear it from me," Amelia said. He regarded her silently. "You're afraid she'll reveal the truth." "I'm not afraid for myself," she said. "Only for you. Scandal destroys men faster than women in our world." He almost smiled. "I think it's the other way around. Women bear its wounds longer." A fragile silence stretched between them. The fire crackled softly. The shadows along the shelves seemed to breathe. "Will you stand with me if she speaks?" Amelia asked finally. He met her gaze. "I will stand for the truth, whatever it is." "Then we are agreed," she said quietly, "because the truth is already standing in this room." The next afternoon, Clara arrived dressed in morning black, a calculated irony. She greeted Sebastian with the familiarity of someone who believed charm could erase history. "My lord," she said sweetly, "how strange that fate unites us again." He bowed slightly. "Fate has an unfortunate sense of humor," she smiled. "I came to congratulate you both. Your marriage has quite captured London's imagination." "Then you'll forgive us if we decline to entertain it further," Amelia replied. Clara turned, her tone lilting. "Of course, but one must wonder what will happen when the imagination meets the truth." Sebastian's voice was quiet but firm. "Truth tends to lose interest when people try to sell it for profit." Clara blinked, caught off guard. "You defend her?" "I defend decency," he said. "You would do well to remember it." For the first time, Clara faltered. She recovered quickly, murmured a farewell, and swept from the room. But as the door closed, Amelia exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Sebastian turned to her. "She won't stop." "I know," Amelia said. "But she's already lost the one thing she wanted most, an audience." He studied her face for a moment longer before nodding, then let her speak into silence. That night, as rain whispered against the windows, Amelia sat at her desk, writing not to anyone but to herself. "Truth is a light that burns when it is hidden too long," she wrote. "If it must destroy the walls around me, so be it. I would rather stand in ruin than live in shadow." Downstairs, in his own room, Sebastian read a letter from an associate that mentioned Clara's name. He tore it in half and threw it into the fire. Watching the paper curl into ash, he realized something startling, that his anger toward deception had begun to fade, replaced by fear of losing what had unexpectedly become real. The following evening, Ashbourne House glowed with the light of 100 candles. Sebastian had agreed at his mother's insistence to host the annual spring ball. The grand hall shimmered with crystal and gold, the orchestra tuning in the corner, the scent of roses thick in the air. Guests filled the marble stairway like a river of silk. Society had come to witness reconciliation, the Duke's return to public life with his mysterious wife at his side. Amelia stood before the mirror in her dressing room as Martha adjusted the final pearl at her throat. "They will stare," Martha murmured, "but let them. Sometimes silence speaks louder when paired with grace." Amelia smiled faintly. "Grace has been my only weapon." Downstairs, Sebastian greeted ministers, duchesses and lords with the ease of a man bred for performance. Yet beneath his civility ran a quiet tension. His eyes, against his will, kept searching for her. When Amelia descended the staircase, the room paused. She wore a gown of deep sapphire, her hair caught with silver pins, her expression calm but radiant. The guests murmured approval. Even those who had once whispered mockery found themselves silent, disarmed by her composure. Lady Morland leaned toward a friend and whispered, "The Duke's mistake has turned into art." Sebastian's gaze met hers across the crowd. For an instant, The noise of the ballroom dissolved. He bowed slightly as she approached, and she curtsied. The ritual transformed into something far older than etiquette. "Your Grace," he said softly, "you look as though the evening owes you its light." She tilted her head. "Then perhaps you should claim a dance before it fades." He hesitated, then extended his hand. One waltz to satisfy the crowd. The orchestra began a slow, haunting waltz that wrapped the air in memory. As they moved, whispers rippled around the room. They say it's their first dance as husband and wife. For the first few turns, their distance was precise, polite. Then, almost imperceptibly, the rhythm drew them closer. Her gloved hand rested against his shoulder. His breath brushed her temple. The chandeliers blurred above them as the world turned slower, quieter. He said under his breath, "You seem unafraid." "I learned long ago," she murmured, "that fear has no place where dignity lives. You speak like a poet again. Then perhaps you should start listening like one." He smiled, small, fleeting, genuine. It startled her. When the music ended, applause filled the hall. For the first time since their marriage, she felt the warmth of his hand linger before releasing hers. But the moment of peace could not last. Clara stood near the edge of the crowd, her expression unreadable. She stepped forward, her voice light but piercing. "How lovely," she said. "It almost makes one forget how short memories can be." A few nearby guests exchanged glances. Sebastian's jaw tensed. "Clara," he said quietly, "this evening was not arranged for your amusement." "Then for whose?" she asked sweetly. "Surely not for mine. I simply came to admire the performance." Amelia turned to her sister, her voice calm. "Performances end, Clara. The truth remains." Clara's smile thinned. "Truth? You speak of it as though you own it." Amelia took a measured step closer. "No one owns truth. It simply outlasts those who fear it." The room had fallen completely silent. Only the flicker of candlelight moved between them. Sebastian glanced around, realizing the danger. "Ladies," he said firmly, "this is neither the place nor the hour for quarrels." Amelia inclined her head. "You are right, my lord." She turned to Clara and added softly, "Some truths need no audience." Without waiting for a reply, she walked away, her gown whispering across the marble like the closing of a curtain. Later, in the quieter corridors beyond the ballroom, Sebastian found her near the terrace. She stood at the open doors, breathing in the night air heavy with the scent of rain. "You handled her well," he said. "She thrives on reaction," Amelia replied. "Deny her that, and she starves." He looked at her in the dim light. "It must be exhausting, fighting on so many fronts." "Only when I forget why I fight," she said. "Not for approval, not even for survival, but for the right to look at myself without shame." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I was wrong about you." She turned to face him fully. "Then perhaps we are both learning." He hesitated, his expression softening. "When I first met you in the garden years ago, you said that beauty does not ask for witness. But I have been a witness tonight, and I cannot pretend not to see." The admission hung between them like a confession. She looked down, her voice barely audible. "You should be careful, my lord. Seeing can lead to feeling." He smiled faintly. "Perhaps that is what I feared all along." For a long moment, they stood in silence, the sounds of laughter and music fading behind them. Then a distant crash of thunder rolled over the city. Amelia looked toward the darkening sky. "Storms have a way of clearing what must be cleared," she said. He nodded slowly. "Then let it come." Inside, the orchestra began another song, louder, faster. Guests resumed their laughter, unaware that something in the house had shifted, something fragile and undeniable. As the rain began to fall, Sebastian reached for her hand, only briefly, before letting go. But the touch was enough to mark the change neither of them could undo. The night after the ball stretched long and sleepless. The rain that had begun as a gentle rhythm against the windows grew heavier, thrashing at the city like a warning no one yet understood. Amelia stood by her writing desk, gazing at the unopened letters scattered there. Among them lay one from her mother, unopened since the morning it carried the Harwood seal, her family's crest pressed in red wax. She hesitated, then broke it open. "Your father is gravely ill," it read. "Clara has gone to Harwood Manor. If you have any sense of duty left, come at once." For a moment the room swayed. She folded the letter carefully, set it down and summoned Martha. "Prepare the carriage," she said. "We leave for the manor before dawn." By the time the wheels of the coach rolled through the countryside, dawn had not yet broken. Fog hung low across the fields, the horizon a smear of silver and ash. Sebastian had discovered her absence only an hour later, when he woke and found the servants in confusion. Without hesitation, he mounted his horse and followed the same road she had taken. The storm followed them both. Harwood Manor appeared through the mist like a memory refusing to die. Once grand, it now looked weary, shutters trembling, ivy crawling up the stone. When Amelia stepped inside, the air smelled of illness and neglect. The old housekeeper met her in the hall, wringing her hands. "Your lady mother and Miss Clara are upstairs," she whispered. "The master is very weak." Amelia climbed the stairs quickly, skirts brushing the rail. Her mother sat at her father's bedside, pale and drawn. Clara stood by the window, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Lady Harwood looked up. "You came. I received your letter," Amelia said. "How bad is he?" "Bad enough," her mother replied coldly, "but not beyond God's mercy." Amelia took her father's hand. It was frail, cold and trembling. "Father, it's me," she said softly. His eyes opened, clouded with fever. "My daughter," he murmured. "I have two, don't I? One forgotten, one remembered. Rest now," she whispered. "You needn't speak." He smiled faintly. "Too late for rest. The house remembers its sins better than its prayers." Before she could answer, a servant burst in, breathless. "My lady, the west wing, it's burning." The words seemed impossible. Then the smell reached them, sharp, choking, undeniable. Smoke curled under the door, followed by the faint crackle of flames. Lady Harwood screamed. Clara covered her mouth, eyes wide. Amelia ran to the corridor. The far end of the hall glowed orange, fire spreading along the tapestries, devouring the wood. "Get the servants out," Amelia shouted. "Take my father through the east stair." She seized a bucket from the wall, threw water across the nearest curtain, and coughed as smoke filled her lungs. Below, the sound of shouting grew louder. The wind from an open window fanned the flames higher. Through the chaos, she heard Clara cry out from the landing. The fire had cut off her path. "Clara," Amelia called. Her sister's face appeared through the smoke, terrified. "I can't. The stairs are gone." "Stay there," Amelia shouted. She pulled her skirt above her knees and moved toward the flames. The heat seared her skin, the air stung her eyes. When she reached Clara, the younger woman was trembling, paralyzed by fear. "Go," she screamed. "You'll die if you stay." Amelia grabbed her arm. "Then we die together. Move." Half dragging her sister, she found a side corridor that led toward the study and an open balcony beyond. The smoke followed them like a living creature. As they reached the door, a beam collapsed behind them, showering sparks. Outside, rain began to pour again, violent, relentless. Amelia pushed Clara toward the balcony rail. "Climb down the ivy. It will hold." Clara stared at her in disbelief. "You'll fall. Better I fall than you burn. Go." Reluctantly, Clara obeyed, disappearing into the night. When Amelia turned back, another figure appeared through the smoke. Sebastian. His coat was drenched, his face streaked with soot. "Amelia!" he shouted. She coughed, struggling to breathe. "Clara's safe, she's gone down." He reached her in 2 strides, pulling his cloak around her shoulders. "You shouldn't have come here alone." "I had to," she gasped. "It's my home, what's left of it." The roof groaned above them. He pulled her close. "We're leaving now." Together they moved toward the stairs, but fire had consumed the passage. The only escape was the balcony. Rain hammered the stone, hissing against the flames. "Trust me," he said. Without hesitation, she took his hand. He led her onto the balcony's edge, wrapped his arm around her waist, and leapt into the drenched garden below. They landed hard in the mud, rolling until the breath returned to them. When she looked up, Harwood Manor was a tower of flame against the black sky. Windows shattered. Sparks flew into the storm like dying stars. She began to rise, but he held her still. "It's over," he said softly. "No," she whispered. "It's only beginning." Hours later, as dawn bled into the horizon, the fire had died. The house stood in ruin, half blackened, half still standing. Servants huddled together, coughing, crying. Lady Harwood sat wrapped in blankets, her face ghost-pale. Clara approached Amelia, eyes red. "You saved my life," she said, voice shaking. "After everything I said, after what I planned to do." Amelia looked at her calmly. "We save what we can, the rest we leave to ash." Clara began to cry, and for once, Amelia did not look away. Sebastian stepped forward, his coat soaked, his expression unreadable. "You could have died," he said quietly. She met his gaze. "Would it have mattered to you if I had?" He hesitated. "Yes," he said simply. "More than I care to admit." The wind swept through the broken halls, scattering embers into the wet earth. For the first time, Amelia felt the weight of silence between them lift, not into comfort, but into truth. They stood side by side, watching the smoke curl into the sky. Behind them, the sun broke through the clouds, weak but real. By the next morning, the storm had passed, leaving only the smell of smoke and damp earth. Harwood Manor stood in ruins, its once white stone streaked black, its windows shattered, its great staircase collapsed into a heap of ashes. The survivors moved through the wreckage like ghosts, searching for what could still be saved. Amelia sat beside her father's bed, now moved to a smaller, unburned chamber. His breathing was shallow, his face grey. The doctor had come and gone, murmuring words that meant little except one. Soon, Lady Harwood lay in another room, half conscious, weakened by smoke and shock. Clara, pale but unharmed, remained close, guilt shadowing her every glance. Sebastian stood by the doorway, silent, his coat still marked with soot. When her father stirred, Amelia leaned forward, taking his hand. "You must rest," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "Rest comes when one has nothing left to confess." Her throat tightened. "Father," he shook his head slowly. "No, child. I cannot leave this world with silence on my tongue. The truth belongs to you now." Lady Harwood's weak voice drifted from the adjoining room. "Not now," she murmured. "He isn't strong enough." He ignored her, his gaze fixed on Amelia. "You were born of marriage, not of sin," he said. "It was Clara who came after, in secrecy. I married your mother 2 years before she claimed otherwise. When the church questioned our papers, she hid the first ceremony. She feared disgrace, loss of inheritance. To protect her own standing, she rewrote the story, and you paid for it." The words fell like stones into a well. Amelia felt the air leave her lungs. "You mean, I am the rightful heir?" He nodded once. "Yes, you are Harwood by name and by law." Across the room, Lady Harwood let out a broken cry. "He lies," she gasped. "He promised me he would never—" Her voice failed her. Sebastian stepped forward, his expression dark with realization. "You kept her hidden because you were afraid," he said to Lady Harwood. "Afraid the world would discover she had the only thing you could not control, legitimacy." Lady Harwood turned her face away. "You know nothing of survival, my lord. In our world, a woman protects her place by any means. And in doing so," Amelia said softly, "you took mine." Her mother closed her eyes. "I gave you shelter. You gave me silence," Amelia replied. The wind outside stirred the tattered curtains, scattering ash across the floor. For a long time, no one spoke. Then her father's voice, faint but clear. "Promise me, child, that you will not let bitterness write your life. The truth frees, but it also wounds." Amelia pressed his hand gently. "I promise." He exhaled a long, trembling breath. "Then I may rest." Moments later, the breath stopped. The stillness that followed felt heavier than the ruin around them. Amelia bowed her head. Clara covered her face with her hands and wept. Even Lady Harwood's composure crumbled into silent sobs. Sebastian crossed the room and placed a steady hand on Amelia's shoulder. "He left you more than a name," he said quietly. "He left you the courage to bear it." She turned toward him, her eyes filled with tears she refused to shed. "I never wanted inheritance," she said. "Only truth." "Then now you have both," he replied. The days that followed passed in a blur of mourning and practical necessity. The fire had destroyed much of the estate, but documents and records were recovered from the study. Among them was the original marriage certificate, proving her parents' union. Its ink faded, but still legible. It was undeniable. Word spread quickly through the countryside, then to London. The hidden daughter, the rightful heiress, the Duchess by birth. What had once been whispered as scandal now returned as astonishment. Newspapers printed cautious praise. Old allies reappeared with congratulations thinly disguised as apologies. One afternoon, while officials reviewed the estate papers, Clara came to Amelia's room. She stood at the door, hesitant, a shadow of her former pride. "I should hate you," she said quietly. "But I can't. You saved me when I would have let you burn." Amelia looked up from the desk. "Perhaps that is what family is meant to do, save each other from our worst selves." Clara swallowed hard. "I don't expect forgiveness. Then we understand each other," Amelia said gently. "Forgiveness is not given. It's earned." As Clara turned to leave, she paused. "He loves you, you know," she said without looking back. Amelia's hand froze over the papers. "Who?" "The Duke," Clara said. "He doesn't know it yet, but he does. I saw it when the house was burning." Before Amelia could answer, Clara was gone. That evening she stepped outside into the cool twilight. The sky above the manor glowed faintly pink, the first stars trembling through the haze. Sebastian stood near the ruined fountain, his back to her, hands clasped behind him. "You'll rebuild it," he said as she approached. The estate, the name, everything your father meant for you to have. She stopped beside him. Brick and titles are easy to rebuild. Trust is not. He nodded slowly. You're right. But sometimes trust begins in ruin. She looked at him, then really looked, and saw not the man who had humiliated her at the altar, but the one who had leapt through fire without hesitation. Why did you come for me that night? She asked. Because when I realized you might die, I discovered I couldn't bear it. The simplicity of his words cut deeper than any declaration. For a moment neither spoke. Then she said, Truth burns, my lord, but it also purifies. He smiled faintly. Then perhaps we've both been cleansed. The wind shifted, carrying away the last threads of smoke from the ruins. Harwood Manor was silent, but for the first time in years, the silence felt like peace. Within a fortnight, London had learned everything. The story moved faster than any carriage, faster even than scandal itself. What had begun as whispers of deceit became the most talked-about revelation of the season. The woman the Duke had mistakenly married was in truth the rightful Harwood heiress, the legitimate daughter of a noble line wronged by secrecy. The city papers called her the Hidden Duchess, some with admiration, others with envy. Society, ever hungry for reinvention, now adored what it had once despised. Invitations flooded Ashbourne House. Portrait painters requested sittings. Dressmakers begged to design her gowns. Every salon, every ballroom, every whispered conversation turned on her name. Amelia endured it all with the same calm she had shown when the world scorned her. She appeared at charity events, spoke little, smiled when needed, and listened more than she talked. Her poise fascinated people. She has the serenity of someone who's been through fire, one columnist wrote, not knowing how literal that truth was. Sebastian watched it all unfold with a mixture of pride and unease. He had spent years mastering politics and strategy, but nothing had prepared him for a woman who needed neither defense nor permission. When he saw her across crowded rooms, surrounded by admirers and petitioners, something inside him ached with both admiration and regret. At Lady Morland's reception, the same place that once buzzed with cruel gossip, Amelia entered to a hush. The orchestra paused, heads turned. She wore no jewels, only a simple gown of ivory silk and a single pearl at her throat. The restraint startled everyone. Lady Morland herself hurried forward, breathless with apology and curiosity. My dear Duchess, London owes you 1,000 apologies. You must know how stories grow when deprived of facts. Amelia's smile was gentle but firm. Facts require no apology, Lady Morland. They only need time. Polite laughter followed, and the moment passed, but not before every guest understood that the power in the room had shifted. Later that evening, as she stood near the window, she overheard two men whispering nearby. She's remarkable, one said, to rise from disgrace to glory in a matter of weeks. The other replied, or perhaps she was never disgraced, only underestimated. For the first time, Amelia felt no need to turn away. She sipped her champagne and let the words wash over her like distant music. When the reception ended, Sebastian offered his arm for the first time in public since their wedding. She hesitated only briefly before taking it. As they descended the marble steps, flashes from the photographer's cameras lit the night like lightning. In the carriage, he broke the silence. You've conquered them all, he said quietly. She shook her head. No, I've simply shown them who I already was. He looked out the window, then back at her. London may have found its perfect duchess, but I... He stopped himself. She waited. But you what? He exhaled. I find myself wondering what I deserve. You were humiliated because of my blindness, and yet, somehow, you bear it with grace instead of anger. Her voice softened. Anger is heavy. Grace is easier to carry. He smiled faintly. You make forgiveness sound effortless. It isn't, she said. It's work, every day. The next morning, a newspaper arrived with their portrait from the ball. The caption read, The Duchess reclaimed beauty, courage, and the spirit of England. The photograph showed them standing side by side, their hands almost touching. Sebastian studied it for a long time before setting it on her desk. You've become a symbol, he said. They'll make myths about you now. She folded the paper neatly, then let the myth be one of survival, not perfection. Days turned into weeks. The ruin at Harwood Manor began reconstruction under her direction. She visited the site often, speaking with architects and labourers, ensuring that the orphanage she had promised would be built upon the cleared west wing. When questioned by reporters, she said simply, Let something good grow where vanity once stood. Her words circulated through London faster than any sermon. Women quoted her at tea. Men admired her restraint. The Duchess had become not merely a figure of romance, but of renewal. One evening, After a long day of plans and correspondence, she returned home to find the study illuminated by a single lamp. Sebastian sat there, reading one of her father's recovered journals. He looked up when she entered. "I didn't mean to intrude," he said. "Your father wrote beautifully." "He wrote for himself," she replied. "He never thought anyone would read his words." He closed the book gently. "He wrote of you," he said. "How he feared you'd grow up in silence. How he prayed you'd one day speak without fear." Amelia's voice trembled slightly. "Then he lived long enough to see it." Sebastian rose, hesitated, then said, "You've become everything I pretended not to believe in." She met his gaze. "Then stop pretending." He looked as though he might answer, but instead only nodded. "Soon, perhaps." As she turned to leave, he said quietly, "You belong to history now, Amelia. But I hope part of you still belongs to me." She paused at the door. "That depends on whether you intend to remember the woman or the legend." He smiled, the first true smile she had ever seen from him. "Both, I think." Outside, the bells of London chimed the late hour. In drawing rooms and parlours, people still spoke her name, still tried to define her. But Amelia no longer needed their approval. The fire had already burned away every illusion. She looked out at the night skyline, the river glimmering under the moon, and whispered to herself, "Let them talk. I have already been heard." The rain had returned to London, a steady whisper against the tall windows of Ashbourne House. The season's endless gatherings had paused for a single evening, and the city outside seemed to rest, holding its breath. Amelia sat in the library, surrounded by soft light and the scent of old books. She had dismissed the servants hours ago, preferring solitude to admiration. A fire burned low in the grate, the same kind of fire that had once consumed her home, but this one was gentle, patient, alive. She was reading one of her father's journals when she heard footsteps in the corridor, heavy, deliberate. She didn't turn. "You have a talent," came Sebastian's voice, low and measured, "for appearing perfectly calm when your world is changing again." She closed the book slowly. "And you have a habit of entering rooms as if you own them, even when you don't." He smiled faintly. "Old habits die hard." For a moment, the only sound was the rain. He stepped closer, stopping near the fire. "You've avoided me for 3 days." "I've been occupied," she replied evenly. "The orphanage design was approved, and there were letters to answer, dozens of them." "I know," he said quietly. "I read one." She turned, startled. "You what?" "It was open on your desk. From the House of Lords." He hesitated. "They're offering you a seat on the charitable board. You've achieved more in 3 weeks than I did in 3 years. Amelia set the journal aside. "You didn't come here to discuss committees, my lord." "No," he admitted. "I came because I don't know where I stand with you anymore." Her eyes softened. "You stand where you've always stood, near enough to be seen, but never enough to be known." He took a slow breath, as if gathering courage. "Then let me be known." She said nothing. He crossed the room, stopping a few feet from her chair. "The night of the fire, when I saw you through the smoke, I realized that I'd built my life on control, on pride. I thought affection was weakness. That duty mattered more than feeling. And then, when I thought I'd lost you, I understood something I can't unlearn." "What?" she whispered. "That I love you," he said simply. The words fell between them like the final note of a long-forgotten song. Amelia looked into the flames, her expression unreadable. "You loved the idea of me once," she said softly. "A quiet woman who would obey. Then you loved the challenge of me, the one who defied you. Which is it now?" He took another step closer. "It's neither. I love the woman who stood in the ashes and rebuilt herself without asking anyone's permission. I love you for surviving me." Something inside her trembled, not with fear, but with the memory of everything they had been through, the humiliation, the fire, the truth, the rebirth. She rose slowly. "And what do you expect me to say?" "Nothing," he said. "Only that I've said what I should have said long ago." The fire crackled softly. Rain tapped against the windows like the rhythm of a heart that had waited too long. She walked past him toward the shelves, touching the spines of the books her father had once loved. "When I stood at the altar, and you turned from me, I thought my heart had died. But it didn't. It went quiet, waiting for something real." She turned back to him, her grey eyes luminous in the firelight. "Do you mean your words, Sebastian? Or are they just another duty you think you owe?" He met her gaze steadily. "If this is duty, may I never be free." She studied him for a long time, then said, "Love is not a prize for repentance." "I know," he said softly. "It's a gift and one I don't deserve." Amelia exhaled slowly, as though setting down the weight of years. "Perhaps none of us deserve it," she murmured. "But sometimes, after enough loss, we stop asking who deserves and simply accept what remains." He stepped closer, hesitant, as though she might still vanish into the smoke of memory. "Then will you let what remains be us?" For the first time, she smiled, not the polite smile of London drawing rooms, but something real, quiet, and trembling at the edges. "I don't know what we are," she said, "but I know I no longer wish to face the world without knowing what could be." He reached out, his hand hovering near hers. "May I?" She nodded once. When his fingers touched hers, it was not the desperate grasp of a man seeking forgiveness, but the steady, human contact of equals. The same hands that had once let her go now held her without possession. They stood in silence, the firelight wrapping around them like the memory of warmth rediscovered. After a long moment, she said quietly, "You may have broken my heart once, Sebastian, but tonight you reminded it how to beat." He closed his eyes briefly, then pressed her hand to his lips. Outside, the rain softened. The city's noise dimmed to nothing. The world, it seemed, had granted them a moment untouched by past or future. In that stillness, Amelia Munro, once a forgotten bride, finally forgave, not because she had to, but because she was free to. And the man who had once chosen pride over love finally understood that redemption is not earned in apology, but in constancy. They stood before the fire as dawn began to lighten the horizon, two silhouettes against the glow, not ruined, not perfect, but alive. Spring returned to England, as if to prove that even ruin has seasons. The first buds appeared along the hedges surrounding Harwood Manor, now alive with the sound of workmen and the echo of hammers. What had once been blackened rubble was now an open frame of scaffolds and fresh limestone. Amid the construction, Amelia stood beside an architect's table beneath a makeshift awning, reviewing plans for the new orphanage wing. The architect, an older man with kind eyes, gestured to the blueprints. "The classrooms will face east as you wished. Morning light will fall through the long windows. And here," he pointed to the garden sketch, "a place for the children to read outdoors." Amelia smiled faintly. Light and words both save lives. She signed the paper with firm strokes. Her handwriting, once small and uncertain, was now steady and bold. From across the courtyard, Sebastian watched her. He had come quietly that morning, avoiding ceremony. She wore a simple linen dress and a wide-brimmed hat, her hair unpinned by the wind. There was no trace of the Duchess society adored, only the woman he had once nearly lost to fire and pride. He approached as she rolled up the drawings. "You've turned ashes into blueprints," he said. She glanced up, smiling. "And you've learned poetry." "Only by imitation," he replied. "You make it seem natural." They walked together along the half-built path that would lead to the orphanage. Workers paused respectfully as they passed, tipping their caps. It had become known that the Duchess herself visited daily, sometimes bringing tea and bread for the men, sometimes helping to plant the new gardens by hand. Sebastian looked toward the horizon. "When I was a boy," he said, "my father told me the measure of a man was the legacy he left. I spent half my life believing that legacy meant victory. You've taught me it means something quieter, endurance." She looked at him gently. "Then perhaps we've both rebuilt more than we expected." He stopped walking, facing her. "Do you regret it?" "What?" "Everything. The scandal, the marriage, the years between us." Amelia studied the nearly rebuilt house, the sound of laughter from the workers' children, the sunlight glinting off the scaffolding. "Regret?" she said softly. "No. Without the ruin, there would be no reason to begin again." He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple, gold, unadorned. She looked at it in surprise. "You already gave me one." He shook his head. "That one belonged to duty. This one belongs to choice." For a long moment she said nothing. Then, slowly, she removed the old ring from her finger and placed it in his hand. "Then let us both choose," she whispered. He slipped the new ring onto her finger. The wind lifted her veil of hair, brushing it across his cheek. The sound of the hammers faded behind them, replaced by birdsong. She smiled. "You do realize London will think we've married again." He returned the smile. "Let them. It's the first rumor I'd like to be true." They walked on, side by side, into the garden that was slowly taking shape. Workers planted rows of lavender and white roses, chosen to purify the air that once smelled of smoke. At the far end, where the west wing had burned most completely, a new foundation was rising, the children's home. Amelia paused to watch a group of orphans carrying small pots of seedlings to plant. A girl of perhaps 8 approached shyly, offering her a daisy. "For you, Duchess," she said. Amelia knelt, taking the flower. "You keep it," she said. "Gardens are for growing things you wish to remember." The child smiled and tucked the daisy behind her ear. Sebastian watched them, his expression soft. "You're rebuilding more than a house," he murmured. "You're rebuilding faith." Faith isn't built, she said, rising. It's found usually when we think we've lost it. He nodded, his voice low. Then I found mine here. That evening they dined outside for the first time in months. The air smelled of rain and cut grass. Lanterns hung from the unfinished veranda, flickering in the twilight. Amelia poured wine for them both, her hand brushing his as she set the bottle down. To what shall we toast? She asked. He thought for a moment. To ruin, he said. The best teacher I've ever had. She smiled. And to forgiveness, the lesson I never expected to learn. Their glasses touched, the sound small but certain. As darkness settled over the manor, the first lights from the new orphanage shone through the windows, steady, warm, alive. The workers had begun sleeping there, guarding their progress like watchmen of hope. Sebastian took her hand beneath the table. London will write songs about us, he said quietly. Then let them, she whispered. But let the children here write better ones. In the distance, the rebuilt bell tower of Harwood chimed softly, marking the hour. It no longer sounded mournful, but clear and bright, the toll of something reborn. Summer arrived in London with an unusual heat. The city shimmered in light, but beneath its polished surface, politics stirred like thunderclouds gathering over clear skies. Sebastian had spent the last month in Parliament, pushing reforms for veterans and widows of war causes long ignored by his peers. His proposals had drawn both praise and resentment. There were whispers in the corridors. The Duke is ruled by his wife. Others said worse, that his marriage had clouded his judgment, that he acted out of guilt rather than principle. When the House met one humid afternoon in June, he stood alone at the centre of the chamber, defending a bill that would divert funds from noble estates to the common poor. His voice was calm, deliberate, unyielding. But as he spoke, Amelia sat in the upper gallery, watching the faces below, faces tight with pride, fear, and the slow boil of envy. When the session ended, an old adversary, Lord Rutledge, approached Sebastian with a courteous smile sharpened like a blade. "A fine speech, my lord," he said, "though one might wonder whether it was yours or your duchess's." Sebastian's jaw tightened. "If wisdom sounds foreign to you, that's hardly my wife's fault." Rutledge's smile deepened. "A pity. The house dislikes husbands led by ambition or by affection." Amelia, still in the gallery, saw the tension rise. She also saw the flash of reporters' notebooks, the promise of tomorrow's headlines. That evening, when he returned home, his temper was unusually short. He threw his gloves onto the table, pacing. "They twist everything," he said. "Every gesture, every word. They'll reduce this to gossip by morning." She watched him quietly. "You've faced worse." "Not like this," he snapped, then caught himself. "Forgive me. It's not you I'm angry with." "I know," she said softly. "But you're forgetting something." He turned to her, frustrated. "And what is that?" "That power belongs to those who refuse to be shaken by mockery," she said. "They call you a man ruled by affection. Then let them. Affection builds more than their pride ever will." He stared at her, then gave a weary laugh. "You make even humiliation sound noble." "It's not noble," she replied. "It's necessary." The following day the newspapers carried the expected venom. The Duchess behind the Duke's reforms, a woman's hand in men's affairs. Some papers praised her influence, others ridiculed it. One cruel cartoon showed Sebastian kneeling while she whispered in his ear. Ashbourne House's staff tried to hide the papers, but Amelia requested every copy. She spread them across her desk, reading each line with calm precision. "They'll tire of their mockery soon," she said. "They always do." That afternoon, however, the gossip turned dangerous. A forged letter appeared in circulation, allegedly written by her, suggesting she had offered favors to secure political votes. It was a lie, but a clever one. The handwriting imitated hers. The seal was a convincing replica. Sebastian found her in the study, pale but composed. "They'll investigate," he said grimly. "This will ruin you." "It will ruin us," she corrected. "And we will not hide." He blinked. "You want to confront it?" "Yes," she said. "I will attend the hearing myself. They've built this on the image of a woman they invented. Let them see the real one." The following morning the House assembled again, this time with reporters pressed against the gallery walls, pencils ready. Amelia entered alone, dressed in grey silk, her expression calm, her chin high. Murmurs filled the chamber. Lord Rutledge rose with mock politeness. "Your Grace," he said, "perhaps you might enlighten us as to whether this letter is your hand or merely your intention." Amelia met his gaze. "If deceit were an art, my lord, you'd be its master." The chamber stirred with laughter, quickly silenced by her next words. "This letter is a forgery," she said clearly. "But the fact that you accepted it so easily says more about your prejudice than my guilt. You cannot imagine a woman acting from conviction without corruption. You cannot accept that intelligence is not seduction, so you write your lies and call them politics. Even the clerks stopped their pens. The silence deepened. I will not beg you for belief, she continued. Truth does not beg, it endures. My husband's work is his own, his heart, too, is his own. And if it happens to align with mine, that is not manipulation, it is partnership, which I am told is still legal in marriage. The chamber broke into applause, hesitant at first, then unstoppable. Sebastian, standing at the back, felt the air shift. For once, power did not belong to the loudest voice, but to the calmest. Later that day, as the crowd outside cheered her carriage, he joined her inside. You've silenced them, he said. She shook her head. No, I've reminded them to listen. He smiled. You've done more than that. You've reminded them what strength looks like. She looked out the window at the cheering faces. Strength looks like truth spoken without fear, but it also looks like a man who stands beside it, not in front of it. He reached for her hand. Then I'll stay beside it for as long as you'll have me. Outside, London roared her name, but inside the carriage there was only quiet, the peace that follows storms, the kind that lasts. Autumn arrived gently that year. London's streets were lined with golden leaves, and the river flowed like polished bronze beneath the low sun. The season of scandal had faded into memory. The newspapers now spoke of reforms, progress, and a new era of compassion in the house. But beyond politics, something far more lasting had taken root. On a crisp morning in late October, carriages began arriving at Harwood Manor. Banners fluttered from the newly rebuilt gates. The Harwood home for children founded by the Duke and Duchess of Ashbourne. The air smelled of fresh paint and roses. A small crowd gathered in the courtyard, villagers, officials and children in clean uniforms. At the center stood Amelia and Sebastian. She wore a simple gown of pale cream wool, her hair pinned back with only a single pearl comb. He stood beside her in dark navy, his expression calm but proud. Between them lay a ribbon stretched across the new gate. When the mayor handed her the scissors, Amelia turned briefly to Sebastian. Would you do the honor? He shook his head with a smile. No, my love. This was your dream before it became mine. She hesitated, then cut the ribbon. Cheers rose from the crowd as the gates swung open. Children ran through the courtyard, laughing. The sound filled the air like bells. Inside, the walls were bright with murals painted by local artists. Scenes of open fields, sunlight, and hands joined in friendship. Each dormitory bore a name: Grace, Courage, Hope, and on every door, a small brass plate inscribed with the same words, for those who begin again. Amelia moved through the halls, speaking softly with the matrons and teachers. Everywhere she looked, she saw what had once been smoke and ruin now transformed into light and order. She paused at one doorway where a group of children sat reading by the window. A boy looked up and asked, "Are you the Duchess everyone talks about?" She smiled. "No, child, I'm the woman who brought you books." The boy grinned. "Then you're the good kind of Duchess." She laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. "I shall try to be." Outside, Sebastian watched her from the garden path, speaking with a group of officials. One of them said, "Your wife has changed the city, my lord. It seems the future now wears a woman's face." Sebastian replied simply, "It always did. The rest of us are only beginning to notice." When the ceremony ended, the guests departed slowly, leaving the manor quiet once more. The sun hung low, gilding the ivy that climbed the new walls. Amelia stood at the fountain, watching the water sparkle in the autumn light. Sebastian joined her, his coat unbuttoned, the wind lifting the edge of his hair. "It's finished," he said. "Your father would have been proud." She smiled faintly. "It isn't finished. Nothing ever is. It only continues." He reached for her hand. "Then let it continue with us." She looked up at him. "You once asked me if I regretted anything," she said. "I have an answer now." "And?" "I regret that it took a fire for us to find our way home." He nodded. "Sometimes it takes a fire to see what's worth saving." They walked together toward the garden's edge, where rows of white roses bloomed, her father's favorite flower. Between them ran a narrow path leading to a bench overlooking the fields. They sat there in the soft light, the silence between them no longer empty but full of memory, of forgiveness, of promise. After a while, Amelia spoke. "Do you remember the day you said I was like sunlight?" He smiled. "And you told me sunlight fades?" "Yes," she said softly. "But I was wrong. It changes from gold to silver, from warmth to calm. It never leaves. It only finds new ways to shine." He looked at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. "Then let me live in its light." She rested her head against his shoulder. "As long as there's dawn, you will." The wind rustled through the roses. Somewhere nearby, The children's laughter carried faintly through the air, not haunting, not echoing, but alive. Above them, the church bell rang 6 times, marking the hour. The sound rolled across the field, steady and bright. Sebastian took her hand and said, "Shall we go home?" She looked toward the manor, the orphanage, the garden, all that had been lost, and all that had been found again. "We already are," she said, and for once, the world agreed.